Hello, my Stanwood Foursquare friends. Kathy Myhre here, and I'm delighted that Tim invited me to be a part of his sermon series on emotions. What a wonderful topic. And so I'm going to give you 3 N's to help you navigate through anger. And the first N is normal. I want to remind you that as human beings, feeling is a very normal experience, and every human being will feel fear and joy and anger and regret and disappointment and gratitude, because feeling is such a normal human function. And a lot of trouble can happen when we distance or suppress our emotions. That's one of the best ways to ensure that the emotion will control you. And I know that some of us were raised in family systems, or some of us have had marriages where anger was expressed in very destructive, if not dangerous and hurtful ways. And so we can become even afraid of our anger. But at its core, anger, like every other emotion, is just an indicator light that it's important for us to pay attention to, because anger can indicate to us how we're experiencing the world, and it can lead us to some very, very healthy change. So anger can inspire us to have that really important conversation we have been avoiding, to let another person understand how we're being impacted and what we want to need. Anger can be a catalyst for great social change. The civil rights movement and Mothers Against Drunk Drivers were fueled at the core by people who saw injustice, people who lost loved ones and cared enough about their experience to do something about it. And anger, if we'll let it, can help us to identify where we need to set our boundaries, what we need to say yes to and what we need to say no to. And so I loved when Pastor Tim said we need to accept it and just confess it as a normal human experience. And emotions are like colors. They have different shades. And so emotions are not sinful or not sinful. It's what we do with them. And so when we're talking about anger, the destructive aspects of anger comes on one of 2 ends of the spectrum. Over here is the Greek word paragismos, and that's that seething hostility where anger gets shut down, and it can lead to a root of bitterness. And that's the word that Paul uses in Ephesians when he says, fathers, don't exasperate your children. And over here would be thumis, which is that unbridled rage that Pastor Tim talked about that can be quite destructive. And so we talk a lot about in marriage and in relationship how damaging outbursts of anger and rage can be, but we don't talk enough about the other destructive aspect of anger, which is that seething hostility, which can lead to patterns of withholding affection, withholding care, withholding nurture, withholding sex from a spouse. And those wounds can go very, very deep. And the next thing I want to tell you about anger is narrative. So oftentimes with anger, it's not the situation that we experience that triggers the anger as much as it is our mindset and the meaning we ascribe to the situation. It's the story we tell ourselves about what we're experiencing. So suppose you're a man and you come home. I worked with this couple once. They had like a whole pile of kids, and they didn't even have time to share 2 words together. So they got what they called the love candle. And if anybody was having that feeling and they wanted intimacy, they would light the candle, and that would be a nonverbal way of saying, let's get these hoodlums to bed and have some fun. And so one of my clients came home from work just exhausted and stressed, and he lit the love candle, and then he went out to mow the lawn, and when he came back in, it was blown out. And so how he thinks about that will determine what emotional path he takes. If his mindset is, oh my gosh, my wife isn't attracted to me anymore, she doesn't enjoy this part of our relationship, the result will he might be feeling, fearful or sad. If his mindset is, I do so much for this family, and all she cares about, all that matters to her is the size of the paycheck I bring home. And, you know, is it too much to ask for when a man comes home to get a little loving? You know, and that kind of a mindset may take you down a path of anger. And if your mindset is, wow, I realize that the kids have been sick and she's been sick and she's probably exhausted, and this is not personal. So how can I minister to her tonight? Maybe I'll put the kids to bed and give her a back rub. So we have to check the validity of the story we tell ourselves about what we experience. And then the third thing, and this is a big word, to understand and manage anger, we have to understand neurobiology. So I want to introduce you to the SUD scale. And that's a very clinical sounding scale, and it refers to subjective units of discomfort, because when we are activated, when we are triggered, when we are flooded with emotion, sometimes we don't even know the emotion we're feeling. And so this scale goes from 0, which is completely calm and relaxed. And when I'm relaxed, I'm very attuned to what's going on inside of me and what's going on in the world. And 10 would be the highest degree you can imagine. So if we're scaling anger, 10 would be, you better call 911. I think I could assault someone. Well, anytime your emotions get to a 4 or higher on that scale, 2 parts of your brain are going to shut down. And the first part are the frontal lobes, and this is your higher executive function. And when the frontal lobes shut in that fight or flight response, your brain will be locked and loaded. You will notice your thoughts looping. You will be highly reactive. You may lose connection with your faith, with your value system, with the larger history you have with this person, not connecting with the fact that you love this person and are committed to it. Somebody's going to die, and it's not going to be you. And without frontal lobes, your brain cannot upload new information. So conversation is unfruitful when your anger is a 4 or higher. And so in Jesus' name, do not have conversation with anybody that doesn't have frontal lobes. They're not going to be able to hear, comprehend anything you have to say. And in Jesus' name, don't try to discipline your kids or have conversation with somebody you love when you don't have frontal lobes, because you're going to say things and do things that are inconsistent with your heart. And if you're a person of character, you're going to feel bad afterward and have relational repair work to do. So I want to invite you to care so much about the things that you're needing and wanting, that when you negotiate with frontal lobes. Your short-term memory and your language center will also crash over a 4. So even your ability to communicate effectively will be impaired. And so we have to understand also that when Pastor Tim talked about that anger that goes from 0 to 10 like that, where we become really reactive, oftentimes what's happening is that there is an earlier event in our life that is getting activated and supercharging whatever it is we're experiencing in the moment. We call this trauma. And a trauma is any negative experience that triggers a strong adrenal charge where you haven't been able to calm down. And so that affects the way that memory gets stored in your brain. And those kinds of memories get stored in their ego-specific way. So the age you were when the event happened is how the memory is stored. And so anytime you experience something that reminds your brain of what you've been through in the past, it can activate those old memories. And the telltale signs and how you know an old memory is being activated is you will go from 0 to 10 like that. You will be aware that your emotions are out of proportion for the event. And you will say and do things that are inconsistent with your heart and values. You may not feel like the competent, godly person that you are. You might feel much younger. And in fact, functionally, you might be much younger. And when I come to see you, I'm going to share with you a story that will encapsulate this. And so it's really important with all of our emotions that we pay attention to how high it is and work on calming ourselves down. And we calm our brain down by calming our body down. And so I'll talk to you more about this when I see you in a few weeks. Take care. Bye.